has dramatically increased the risk of cancer.
What is one thing that you believe about energy that most people don't?
There's no human need for fruit. Just ask an Eskimo. If you want more energy for your workout in the morning, the last thing you want is a fruit smoothie.
Today's episode of Model to Masters is brought to you by TubeBuddy. TubeBuddy is your best friend on your road to YouTube success. I use it every day on my channel to get more views and subscribers, automate the boring tasks, and split test my thumbnails and titles. I've done over 3,800 split tests, which have led to results like taking this 5-year-old video that was getting 250 views a day, and just by changing the thumbnail, it blew up to 15,000 views per day. You can get started on TubeBuddy for free at tubebuddy.com/Evan.
And there he is, Dr.
Hey.
Gundry. How are you doing, sir?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm great. So if you guys don't know Dr. Gundry, he is a 4-time New York Times bestselling author. He is the founder of Gundry MD. I take some of this every single morning. I got a bunch of other stuff here. The 5,000 IUs of vitamin D was a new number to me, so that's crazy. And he's the host of the Dr. Gundry podcast as well. And he's going to be on to talk about health and his new book coming up, The Energy Paradox. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So tell me, what is one thing that you believe about energy that most people don't or might even find radical?
About half the people that I've seen in my practice over the last 20 years actually admit to a diagnosis of fatigue and malaise. And that actually surprised me when I first started doing this over 20 years ago. And we did an informal survey at Gundry MD, and the two number one, wishes and complaints was to have more energy and reduced fatigue. So it's a fascinating, I think, underlooked and undervalued epidemic in this country. Part of the problem is that I think so many of my colleagues in medicine, number one, are overworked. And they view, I guess, being tired or not having a lot of energy as kind of par for the course. And particularly a ton of my women patients are dismissed by, I think, well-meaning health practitioners that, oh, you got 2 kids, you're working a job, maybe you're about to go through, the change, and this is all normal. And just suck it up and have another double espresso, and you'll be okay. But that's actually not normal.
And I know you're an advocate of coffee, just without the sugar and without the milk, or was it A1 milk? What's the kind of milk we're not supposed to have?
Yeah, don't have A1 milk.
Don't have A1 milk.
Is okay.
So people are so used to being stressed out and just, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I'll just take another shot of Red Bull or something. And from the book you said, where was it? How to stop being sick and tired and finally feel good again. So what is top level, some of the recommendations you give people that they may not immediately recognize as being actually valuable for them?
Well, some of the things, I started talking about recently with Lewis Howes, and had just a wonderful throwback that I basically said, hey, one of the biggest problems in our diet right now is the amount of fructose in our diet. And one of the places that fructose is in our diet that people really don't recognize is the amount of fruit that we currently have in our diet. And Lewis got a lot of pushback on letting me say that, but this isn't something I just invented. This isn't my first rodeo. And I didn't just get off the turnip truck. This is actually, number one, my clinic results that I've published, looking at patients for the last 20 years and manipulating their diet. Turns out that fructose which is the sugar in fruit, is very different than glucose in how we make energy out of fructose. And fructose is so interesting in how it's handled. So I got interested in this years ago when I was researching human evolution. And great apes, and believe it or not, we're considered a great ape, are the only time they ever gain weight during the year is during fruit season. And even in the jungle, fruit ripens once a year. And great apes eat fruit to gain weight for the winter. And winter is a time of less food, whether it's a dry season, a rainy season, a cold season. It doesn't matter. There's always a season or two where there's significantly less food. And one of the fascinating things that I learned about fructose is its ability to be made directly in our liver into fat, and that fat is triglyceride. The other thing that's unique about fructose is that normally energy production comes from making ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And there's AMP, and then there's ADP, so adenosine monophosphate, adenosine diphosphate, and then we make it into ATP. What's unique about fructose is that fructose actually stops AMP from being made into ATP and instead takes AMP and makes uric acid, which is actually what causes gout and also raises blood pressure and also damages kidneys. So fructose actually hijacks our energy production. Now, this wouldn't have mattered even 100 years ago when fruit for humans was really only available once a year in summer and early fall. And we could use that like great apes to gain weight for the winter. But now, unfortunately, we have fruit or fruit derivatives like juices 365 days a year. And that's actually abnormal. Now, the other thing that is scary is that the amount of fructose in our fruits has been maximized by hybridization through the years. And for instance, a cup of grapes has anywhere from 22 to 25 grams of fructose in that cup of grapes. Now, to give people an idea of what that means, there's 4 grams of sugar per teaspoon of sugar. So that, let's take 25 as a typical cup of grapes. So let's divide that by 4. So there's about 6 teaspoons of sugar in that cup of grapes. And yeah, I mean, 6 teaspoons of sugar. And we go, well, but grapes are healthy. Well, yeah, they were healthy a long time ago when they weren't plumped up to be giant, sugar bombs. And I'll use the word sugar bomb again. I'm sorry. Blueberries. When I was growing up, a long time ago, blueberries were these little bitter things that were so bitter that you had to pour a half a cup of sugar on them to make them edible, which was great. Now they've been bred for size. I can go to the farmer's market in Santa Barbara and I can find organic blueberries of the size of grapes.
Yeah.
And blueberries now have a considerable higher fructose content than ever before. In fact, the lowest fructose content fruits are actually raspberries and blackberries, followed by strawberries. But blueberries, which used to be some of the lowest, now there's about 10 grams of sugar per 100 per cup of blueberries now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is the recommendation moderation? Is the recommendation just nothing until?
My initial book, Dr. Gundry's Diet Evolution, was give fruit the boot. First of all, there's no human need for fruit. Just ask an Eskimo. The idea that and Believe me, some people call me the father of the carnivore diet because in my quest to get lectins out of people's diets, the obvious ultimate lectin and elimination diet is the carnivore diet because you don't eat any fruits or vegetables.
Right.
And I'm not the father of the carnivore diet, by the way. But so the idea that we have to have fruit in our diet is first of all not true. And the idea that we need fruit every day in our diet goes against any hunter-gatherer society and our society up until the last few years. The Hansa, who have been studied extensively, only eat fruit during the season. And when they eat a ton of it. And, all of my keto colleagues, do you really think that our ancestors, when they found a beehive or they found a fruit tree, said, oh my gosh, I can't have this fruit. I'm not going to gorge on it because I have to stay in ketosis? I mean, really? Of course not. Remember, we're a fruit predator. I like to remind people, the reason we have color vision and your dog doesn't have color vision is we are a fruit predator. We're designed to eat fruit, and we're designed to recognize from the plant when the plant actually wants us to eat its fruit, when its babies are protected. And the cool thing about fructose is that fructose doesn't initially raise insulin. And we can eat tons of fruit without getting full, which, if we were fattening up for the winter, would have been a really great idea. The other thing to remember is 2/3 of our tongue has sweet receptors. And that's why when we found fruit, it would have been a really good idea to just gorge on this stuff. And so I'm not anti-fruit. And in fact, all my books, please, have fruit in moderation in season. And please, season is not 365 days a year.
So we're fattening up, but there's no winter.
Yeah. And, sadly, the British Medical Journal recently published a long-term study looking at the correlation with sweetened beverages, including fruit juices, directly correlating to the incidence of cancer in a 25-year study. And even fruit juices dramatically increase the risk of cancer. And, why? Because, first of all, let's go down, I live near San Diego. My parents retired in San Diego. Let's go to the San Diego Zoo and look in all the cages. And you won't find a juicer in any of the cages. And because an animal doesn't drink juice. So we're unfortunately mainlining juices, sugars that we would have never before. On one of my podcasts, speaking of like COVID, one of the things that's fascinating is that fructose in orange juice dramatically suppresses the ability of white blood cells to eat viruses and eat bacteria for up to 5.5 hours after you drink a glass of orange juice. So that the idea that these things are, health foods has unfortunately, it's just unfortunately incorrect.
You've talked a lot about how diseases start in the gut. How do you get your gut tested? I did the uBiome test a couple of years ago. They now are out of business, maybe questionable science or not. But how do you recommend people actually test to see if their gut is okay or not?
Yeah, so, Hippocrates basically said that all disease begins in the gut, and that was 2,500 years ago, and he was absolutely right. He didn't have the Human Microbiome Project to teach him. But, the longer I've done this now, for instance, if you had asked me 15 years ago what I thought about leaky gut, I would have told you it was pseudoscience and voodoo. But now, because you can test leaky gut, and thanks to the work of among other people, Dr. Fasano from Harvard, you can test for the breakdown of the tight junctions that hold our intestinal barrier together. I use a company called Vibrant America. They, a few years ago, they came up with these tests. I don't know who their marketing person is. Maybe you could advise them, but they're called Zoomers. And that's
Okay.
a stupid name. So the original test was called a wheat zoomer, and it looked not only for markers of leaky gut, it looked for celiac markers, but it looked for all the components of wheat, barley, and rye, which, among other components, are gluten, and gluten happens to be a lectin. But then they expanded those tests to look at corn. I recently published a paper in the American Heart Journal that 70% of people who are sensitive to gluten cross-react with corn. And they actually cross-react with the proteins and think when they're eating corn that they're eating gluten. So,
Wow.
yeah, 70%. And then they developed a lectin zoomer. Imagine who they did that for. And then there's a milk zoomer, and there is a egg zoomer, and there's also a really cool test called a neurozoomer. And one of the things I've learned from the neurozoomer is that if you have a leaky gut, there's a pretty good chance that you also have a leaky brain. And as bad as a leaky gut sounds, let me tell you, if you got a leaky brain, that's not a good thing. Normally, we have a very tight blood-brain barrier where very little can get across into our brain. In fact, it's another subject. It's another subject in the energy paradox where ketones are what our brain uses because normally our mitochondria, if they're working properly, can shift from using glucose as the fuel to burning free fatty acids as a fuel, fat from our fat cells. Unfortunately, the blood-brain barrier is very difficult to get free fatty acids across our blood-brain barrier. It turns out the mitochondria in the brain can burn free fatty acids, but the blood-brain barrier pretty much keeps them out. Ketones, on the other hand, can get across the blood-brain barrier. So one of the fascinating little tidbits that people learn in the energy paradox is that if you're doing everything right, for 12 hours out of the day, we will normally produce ketones in our liver for the sole purpose only of letting our brain have something to eat when we run out of glucose. But what most people don't realize is that brain is such a glucose hog that even at full ketosis, the brain can only get about 70% of its energy needs supplied by ketones. And it still requires about 30% from glucose, from gluconeogenesis from the liver. Wonderful nerdy stuff. Sorry.
No, I know. I like it. Let's go even nerdier. I want to ask you about Akkermansia. So, I know you've talked a bunch about it. People in the audience may not know what that is, but when I did my uBiome test, I scored great, except for Akkermansia, which was low. So then I started immediately like, what is Akkermansia? How do I get more of it in my system? I tried to sign up for a test that they were doing out of Belgium. Patrice Canning had the first pasteurized Akkermansia supplement that they run experiments with. It's not, I couldn't get on, and it's not, public consumption yet. But how do you get more Akkermansia? Maybe for the audience, what is Akkermansia? So we're not super nerding out, but then how can I, Evan Carmichael, get more Akkermansia in my gut?
So Akkermansia muciniphila is a bug that actually lives in the mucus layer of our gut wall. And the mucus layer, by the way, absorbs lectins. And mucus is a sugar molecule, a mucopolysaccharide, that absorbs lectins and keeps lectins from getting to your gut wall and makes leaky gut. So Akkermansia, mucinophilia means mucus lover, and the more mucus that you make, interestingly enough, Akkermansia, the more mucus it eats, it stimulates our gut wall to make more mucus. And so it's this, it's just this love, love, love relationship. The more mucus it eats, the more we make. So Akkermansia actually loves to have us fast. And here's why. It turns out that the more you fast, the more the other bacteria in your gut have basically nothing to eat. And it has access to mucus and can stay alive. And so it in a way, fasting for over 24 hours is a quick and easy trick to increase your Akkermansia. But the other trick, which I think is even more potent, is to give Akkermansia the foods that it likes, and these are prebiotics. So everybody knows probiotics. So Akkermansia, yeah. So Akkermansia is a probiotic, but you right now can't swallow Akkermansia. There are some formulations that are coming up, but nobody's been able to really get it right. But they're there in your gut. They're always there, and you just have to give them what they want to eat. And so give them prebiotic fiber. And I formulated PrebioThrive specifically to give gut bugs the stuff that they want to eat. Now, there's a really fascinating couple of studies that I have in the energy paradox that takes this kind of another step. And I think this will be an easy way to explain it. We've always thought that hunger comes from neurons in our gut sensing lack of food, and it sends a message to our brain, and our brain says, oh my gosh, there's nothing coming through and you should be hungry. Well, some researchers in China said, we now know that the gut microbiome sends tons of messages to our neurons and sends tons of messages to our brain that I talk about in the longevity paradox. And what I did in the energy paradox is, let's take this one step farther. Perhaps we've been naive that these microbiome just kind of talk to neurons. Maybe they control our hunger for what they want to eat. And this has actually been well worked out. We know that there are obesogenic bacteria that we used to think were good at extracting calories from the foods we eat. Well, we now know that the obesogenic bacteria hijack your brain and says, hey, we need simple sugars and we need saturated fats, and that's what we want to eat, and get it to us. And so they actually take over our brain. So Chinese researchers said, wow, if that's the fact, then what if we took a bunch of volunteers and put them on either a 7-day fast or a 14-day water fast, and we give them 100 calories of prebiotics a day that we cannot digest, but the bugs can digest, and let's see what happens to people's hunger. And lo and behold, what they found was that these prebiotic fibers, which, again, we got no calories from it, these people were able to do 14-day fasts without hunger.
Wow.
Because the bugs were being fed. And it turns out they were absolutely right. So this is a microbiome-centered theory of hunger. And it makes so much incredible sense now that we're learning the power of these microbes to communicate their needs directly to us. And the energy paradox is all about this entire new science that's been discovered of the actual language that bugs communicate to our brain. And I mean, talk about nerdy, fun stuff. I mean, it's like a kid in a candy store finding out. And I'll use another example. Look, we've been sending radio waves off into the universe for 50 years now. And we've been saying, hey, anybody out there, are you getting our messages? This is what we look like. And, hey, give us a buzz. So this is like all of a sudden, on our radio telescopes, we get a message back. Oh, yeah, we've been watching you guys for millions of years. And guess what? We live inside of you. And, thanks for figuring out we've been trying to talk to you. And it's like, do.
I love it. So, I mean, this was given to me by a friend who I helped with his YouTube channel. And I've only had it for about a week. It was even before we knew, I was going to talk to you. He didn't know. And he said, you have to get on this. It'll change your life. And this has 30 calories or something in it that I have in the morning. And I've only been on it for about a week, but at night, I'm not even that hungry. Last night, my wife is saying, hey, do you want a second helping? Do you want some snacks? Even healthy snacks. Like, I don't know, I'm feeling kind of good. I didn't associate it to this, but that's great. Now I know the reason. We got to make sure I keep taking it. Wow, wild. I mean, it's crazy how time flies when you're having fun. I appreciate the insights and the wisdom and the knowledge. For people who want to dive